If you stood in Manhattan 20,000 years ago, your morning latte wouldn't be iced, you'd be. A kilometer of glacial ice sat on what's now New York City, pressing the crust like a celestial thumb on a sponge. That's our opening shot. A world so cold your breath crystallizes before it even decides to exit, where sea levels sit roughly 120 meters lower, because vast ice sheets hoard the oceans, and coastlines stretch far beyond today's maps. The planet hasn't hit pause. It's running a different operating system. Welcome to the Last Glacial Maximum, roughly 26,500 to 19,000 years ago. The peak of the Pleistocene's deep freeze, when survival required not just grit, but precision engineering with stone, bone, hide, and fire. Start with the board layout. North America wears a helmet of ice. Scandinavia and much of Northern Europe are locked under kilometers-thick sheets. The weight is obscene, heavy enough to shove land downward, which will rebound slowly for millennia after the thaw. Winds rake treeless steppes. Summers show up like rumors. Oxygen at altitude runs thin enough that sprinting after dinner is a good way to become dinner. The megafauna roster reads like a fantasy bestiary. Woolly mammoths rumble past like shaggy buses. Woolly rhinoceroses swing horns that could cancel your week. Saber-toothed cats carry cutlery in their faces. Cave bears defend the best real estate which, sorry, are caves you wanted. Against this backdrop stride humans who refuse to play the victim. Not cartoon cavemen with clubs and convenient grunts, but adaptable strategists. Homo sapiens, our team, share parts of Europe and Western Asia with Neanderthals. Close cousins with brains every bit as serious as ours, in some cases larger. Both are problem solvers. Both map landscapes in their heads. Both read seasonal patterns like timetables. Their toolkits aren't primitive. They're meticulously tuned systems born from feedback loops, try, break, fix, improve. When your lab is the tundra, A/B testing can get bloody fast. Follow the coastlines out to the edges and you see the most consequential road of the era, Beringia. With sea locked in ice, a broad land bridge links Siberia and Alaska. No passports, no itinerary, just herds migrating across exposed steppe, and humans shadowing them, turning mammoth highways into human ones. Picture groups moving in pulses, stop to scout, stop to butcher, stop to patch a boot with sinew thread, then push on. The point isn't conquest, it's calories. The point is always calories. Zoom back to camp. You expect chaos. You find choreography. Hearths are placed where smoke drifts upward and doesn't choke sleepers. Fire isn't a lucky spark. It's a tool with modes. Warm the shelter, cook the meat, harden the spear tip, light the gallery. Sparks leap from flint and pyrite, struck with practiced rhythm. Hides, scraped to softness with stone scrapers, become tailored layers that trap heat, channel moisture, and keep wind from gnawing bones. Bone needles, tiny, precise eyelets bored by patience and stone, turn sinew into thread and fur into armor. This isn't throw on a pelt. This is technical apparel, custom fit in a world that punishes sloppy seams. Food is a portfolio, not a monoculture. Yes, big hunts matter. A single mammoth can flip a group's fortunes for weeks, fats and marrow delivering dense, brain-friendly fuel. But the real insurance policy is breadth. Berries when the tundra allows, nuts cracked by hammerstones, mushrooms gathered from damp edges, water lily rhizomes hauled from icy ponds and boiled into starch. Coastal groups dive for shellfish, rake into tidal zones and chew seaweed for minerals their inland cousins struggle to get. In a pinch, a hedgehog becomes a spiky kebab. Nothing wasted. Everything evaluated by energy in versus energy out. And yet this is not a life of only hunting and chewing. It's planning. It's model building in the mind. Where do reindeer funnel between ridges during migration? Which slope stays out of the wind? Where does snow drift deep enough to trap, but shallow enough to approach? The landscape is not just scenery. It's a machine that can be understood, then used. You don't outrun cold. You reroute it. You don't fight ice. You finesse it. The megafauna aren't just steaks with legs. They're walking hardware stores. Tusk becomes wedge and ornament. Bone becomes handle, all harpoon flute. Hide becomes shelter skin stretched over frames. Even dung, yes, dung dries into a fuel that burns hot when wood is scarce, a practical answer to an ecosystem's insult. You smell it, you wrinkle your nose, you warm your fingers anyway. What about thinner air? At altitude and in chill, your body coughs up heat with every exhale while the cold steals more from skin and breath. Chasing a hare across crusted snow isn't a sprint, it's a budget meeting. Humans of this world manage effort, like accountants manage ledgers. They ambush, they funnel. They drive animals into traps or off cliffs, where physics does the heavy lifting. They keep the line between bold and reckless visible, even if it blurs on the worst days. Now listen for the parts that don't sound like survival at all. In lamplight made from animal fat, someone scrapes pigment, someone else hums. Deep in caves, chosen not for drama but for acoustics and control, hands blow ochre through hollow bones to leave stenciled signatures. Lions and rhinos flicker across stone with shading and motion that suggest the artist studied muscles in action. The axe steals precious calories and returns none except to morale, memory, identity. People who plan hunts also plan stories. People who stitch jackets also stitch meaning. And when death crosses the threshold, there's ritual. Bodies dusted with ochre, graves equipped with tools, beads, and care. Not because ghosts need spears, but because the living need to say something that words, if any existed for this purpose, cannot cover. The statement resonates: you matter, we remember. Practical? Maybe not. Necessary? Definitely. Neanderthals are not background extras here. Evidence says some lived long enough to show arthritis in their bones, pain that implies the group carried them, fed them, sheltered them. They fought, healed, and kept going. They made glue from bark by holding temperatures at just right without a dial. They were not us, but they were close enough that when ranges overlapped, humans and Neanderthals sometimes shared more than territory. The past is complicated. So are we. What's the most bizarre part of this world? Maybe it's the scale of the ice, yes. Maybe it's the way the crust literally springs back after the load melts, land rising like a bruise fading. But I'd nominate the confidence. Picture a shelter framed in mammoth bones, hides lashed tight, hearth smoke feathering toward a vent someone planned on purpose. Outside, blades of wind that could peel optimism off a motivational poster. Inside, beadwork, a child asleep. A hunter resharpening a flint edge by lamplight so thin you can hear the stones whisper. Tomorrow, a drive at the ravine. Next week, a coastal foraging run. In a month, the herd shifts east, and the camp breaks down in hours because every joint, knot, hook, and lash was designed for mobility. So no, this isn't a story about barely making it. It's a story about hacking constraints so relentlessly that failure has to sprint to keep up. It's about using ice as the backdrop, not the headline. And it's the prelude to an arms race of ingenuity you're about to watch unfold. Fire-tuned to distill adhesives, composite tools built for repairability, spears launched with lever arms that turn human throws into projectiles with terrifying range, traps that rearrange the odds, houses that taunt blizzards, clothes engineered at the fiber level, music in the dark, trade without money, burials with meaning, genes mixing at campfires that still flicker inside us. If the ice is the villain, it picked the wrong species. We don't overpower. We outthink. We don't wait for warmth. We manufacture it. And in the next chapter, we take the single most important step from lucky fire to controlled process. We turn flames into chemistry and solve the problem of how to make blades stay on sticks. No modern lab. No thermometer. Just minds that refuse to freeze. They didn't just make fire. They tuned it like a lab instrument to distill glue, harden weapons, and open a new branch on the human skill tree. Start with the spark. In a world that wants to snuff you out, ignition is a ritual of reliability, not luck. Flint meets pyrite. A shower of hot fragments jumps into a nest of tinder. Scraped bark curls, feathered dry grass, powdered fungi. Hands move on muscle memory, blow, feed, shield. The flame catches and the camp exhales because this isn't warmth, it's infrastructure. Fire is the engine that converts frozen landscapes into calories, light, protection, and material science. Without it, you're a tourist on the tundra. With it, you're a resident engineer. Cooking is the first upgrade. Raw meat is a stubborn bank vault. Heat is the key. Roasting cracks proteins, softens connective tissue, and frees calories faster than a cold jaw can manage. Roots and rhizomes that would fight your gut in a raw state surrender when simmered. Think of fire as digestion you do outside the body, saving precious energy you can spend on planning hunts, repairing gear, or not freezing to death. And the taste. Doesn't matter if it's gourmet. What matters is that cooked food returns more than it costs to chew and absorb. That surplus is the thin line between scarcity and slack. Slack you can reinvest in better tools. Now watch the flame become a process. To harden a wooden spear tip, you don't just wave it at heat. You rotate, you hold distance, you watch the color shift. Feel the woods give change under pressure. Moisture leaves lignin and cellulose reorganize, and a point becomes tougher, more resistant to crushing when it meets bone. It's small, but small is where survival lives. Fewer shattered tips in the field means fewer desperate moments at bad ranges. Tiny upgrades compound into safety. Then comes the moment that looks like science class, minus the glassware. Birch bark transforms into a black glassy pitch, sticky, water-resistant, astonishingly strong for hafting stone to wood. The trick? Controlled heat with limited oxygen. Too much air and the bark burns to ash. Too little heat and it sulks without liquefying. The sweet spot, think a few 100 degrees, turns sheets of bark into tar that can cling a flint blade to a shaft like it was born there. No thermometer, no timer, just a dance with physics the makers memorize through sight, smell, and the way smoke changes as compounds break down. How do you hold that temperature in a blizzard? You build kilns out of dirt and patience. A shallow pit, a clay-lined cavity, or a stacked stone chamber chokes airflow while you feed fuel slowly. You tuck bark in a sealed container, bark roll, bone tube, folded hide pierced by a tiny vent. Set it in coals. Let chemistry happen. Bubbles in the tar, slightly too hot. Pale smoke, not hot enough. Acrid, sweet smoke with slow ooze at the vent, perfect. A maker watches the color of the flame, the way the pot sweats, the stubbornness of a stick pushed into the pitch. This is repeatable, teachable, and auditable by results. Blades that don't slip when the spear hits ribs at speed. Pitch alone is good. Pitch plus grit or microfibers becomes great. Sand, powdered charcoal, pulverized bone. Additives turned by trial and error into composite glues that resist shear, cold, and wet. Hafting becomes a system. Seat the blade in a carved notch, smear pitch, wrap with sinew to preload tension, seal with a final slick of tar. Now the weapon is modular. Blade snaps, heat, peel, replace. Shaft breaks, salvage the business end. Repairability is a survival multiplier. You're not running a disposable economy. You're running a field serviceable platform. Fire also calibrates space. Hearths aren't random. They're placed for smoke behavior, thermal reflection, and workflow. Flat stones ring the heat, absorbing and re-radiating warmth like prehistoric radiators. Behind the hearth, a slab or a curved wall throws infrared back at bodies and hides. Above a vent, maybe a crack in the rock, maybe a purposeful gap, pulls exhaust up and away so eyes stop stinging and lungs stop burning. Layered ash tells a story of occupancy. New pale ash on top, charcoal strata below, scattered bone chips and fat drips where meals happened. The hearth is a calendar and a logbook in one. With reliable heat, you upgrade cooking from meat near flame to techniques. Hide bag boiling is a favorite hack. Fill a clean skin with water. Drop in hot stones lifted from the fire with forked sticks. Bring a simmer to roots and meat without a pot that would crack. Swap stones as they cool. Skim scum. Add herbs you've learned. Soothe a sore gut or a throbbing tooth. Then smoking and drying. Rig a rack where surfaces feel warm but never flame-licked. Thin strips of meat spend hours in a slow breath of smoke, picking up compounds that deter microbes and bugs. Suddenly winter isn't a cliff. It's a slope you can descend more safely with a cache that won't rot. Fire is also deterrent tech. Predators don't love crossing a ring of light and heat to test if the hairless apes are sleepy. Sparks and smoke signal other humans too, friend or trouble depending on the day. At dusk, glowing coals shrink the world to a circle where conversation, repair, planning, and teaching live. A child learns to strike sparks without fear. An elder adjusts a novice's hands when hafting pitch begins to run. Knowledge transmits in the warm hours because daylight is for calories and distance, night is for upgrades, and then chemistry returns with a second act, pigments. Ochre isn't just color. Oxides can tan hides, protect wood, and keep mold at bay. Grind it fine. Blend with fat to make a paste that waterproofs seams or paints a mark on tools to track ownership within a group. Charcoal plus gum or pitch becomes a marking stick. Ash mixed into hide dressings changes friction. Even lamp tech evolves. Stone cups or scalloped shells hold rendered fat with a twist of plant fiber for a wick. Flame steadies. Smoke thins. Painters carry light deeper, and seamsters thread needles by a glow that doesn't choke them out. Fire also tests materials before the wilderness does. Heat a new sinew binding near coals. Does it shrink evenly? Good. Does it twist or pop? Bad. Warm a greenwood shaft. If it warps, it's not ready. Dry a treated hide above the hearth line where air is warm and dry, not parched and cracking. Everything through the hot zone is either improved or rejected. Quality control looks like ritual because the cost of failure looks like funerals. You can feel the mindset shift. Fire is no longer a noun. It's a verb you do. You don't have fire, you run fire. Inputs: fuel type, moisture, airflow. Controls: distance, elevation, partial covers, stone mass. Outputs: temperature bands, smoke profile, burn time. It's as close to levers and dials as you get without knobs. And once that mental model exists, it spreads to everything. Snares tuned to species, drives tuned to terrain, shelters tuned to wind. The payoff shows up on the hunt. A composite spear, hardened tip, properly hafted blade, and bindings that shrug off wet cold allow throws at safer distances. Atlatl leverage, coming in the next beat, magnifies that throw into something with frightening velocity and penetration. When a point hits ribs and keeps going, you credit the thrower, sure, but you also credit the flame that hardened and glued, the hands that cooked the pitch, and the hearth that made night work possible. Team sport all the way down to molecules. There's a cultural side to this chemistry. People who can distill glue and control heat also control time. Food keeps longer. Tools last longer. Trips can go farther because a kit is maintainable. The day's schedule bends around what fire enables. Morning rekindle. Midday smolder under stones while the camp moves. Evening rebuild to full flame for cooking and repairs. Fire rhythms are group rhythms, and the group that keeps them better bleeds less in bad weather. Here's the twist that snaps the hook for what's next. Once fire can bind a blade and harden a tip, a new question pops up. How do you make a human arm throw like a predator built for sprint and kill? The answer is simple: elegant leverage. A carved stick that turns a forearm into a catapult. The Atlatl will take everything you learned beside the hearth and launch it across a killing field. From chemistry to kinematics, the skill tree keeps expanding. Ready to see a spear fly like it has a grudge? Imagine throwing a spear so hard it behaves like a bullet, and then walking over to your architectural supply store to pick up the beams. If fire is the camp's operating system, then hunting is the CPU. Everything cycles through it. Food fuels brains, bones become tools, and trophies become real estate. But hunting at Ice Age scale isn't heroics. It's systems engineering. It's designing outcomes so the odds favor you. The ancient hunting playbook reads less like a National Geographic montage and more like an operations manual. Leverage, funnels, physics, and logistics. Start with leverage. The Atlatl, a simple hooked throwing stick, is the upgrade that turns a human arm into a mechanical amplifier. Attach a shaft to a flexible throw, put a dart on the hook, and suddenly the arm's arc carries far more energy. The lever extends the radius of rotation. The wrist becomes a snap point that transfers stored elastic energy to the projectile. For the target, that means greater velocity, flatter trajectories, and more penetration. For the hunter, it means standoff distance. You don't need to be shoulder to shoulder with a mammoth to injure it. You need to land a dozen coordinated strikes while the animal bleeds out and the odds shift. But speed alone doesn't win mammoths. Mammoths are heavy and ornery. They bring tusks and mass rather than speed. That's where landscape engineering enters. Trap lines, pit traps, and funnel systems turn terrain into a teammate. Imagine a herd moving across a slope that narrows between rock outcrops. Hunters set stakes, build low fences or guides with wood and bone, and shepherd animals toward a prepared choke point. Drive the animals into a stall, a cliff edge, or a hidden pit. Let gravity and geometry do the dangerous work. One well-planned drive can convert a dozen scattered hunters into a unit capable of downing a tank-sized herbivore with fewer casualties than a frontal charge. Pit traps deserve a moment. A shallow depression covered with brush and camouflaged materials looks like ground to a stampeding animal. Once the animal hits the covering, it breaks through and tumbles into a concealed hole where escape becomes impossible. Pits are labor-intensive but repeatable, useful when a migration corridor reliably passes the same spot year after year. Archaeological analogues show patterned stake placements and post holes that read like a map of knotted intention. These pits aren't random. They're investments with clear ROI. One successful drive feeds a group for weeks, supports tool fabrication, and produces bone stock for housing. Coordination is the invisible currency. A successful drive requires signals, timing, and roles. Who waves torches? Who blocks the flanks? Who maintains distance to avoid trampling? Calls, whistles, and choreographed movements emerge. The band that practiced together is the band that came home. There's evidence: stone arrangements, multiple hearth clusters, and repeat use layerings, suggesting groups rehearsed techniques and kept specialized toolkits ready. Darts reserved for atlatls, heavy percussion hammers for marrow cracking, and delicate flint knives for butchery choreography. And then there's logistics, because a mammoth doesn't pack itself into backpacks. The butchery sequence is methodical. Field butchery prioritizes transportable calories, meat from haunches, dense fat deposits, and marrow-rich long bones. Meat that rots faster is processed immediately, roasted, cut into strips, smoked, or rendered into tallow. Bones are cracked for marrow. Ribs and skull pieces become building materials or tool blanks. Hide is fleshed and hung to dry near the hearthline, where smoke both preserves and repels pests. Head and tusk sections are parceled for artistic work or barter. Nothing edible or useful gets left, because every pound left behind is an avoided chance to level through the lean season. That brings us to a striking application of kill logistics: architecture. Mammoth bone houses are not a macabre aesthetic. They are elegant structural solutions born from necessity. Where timber is rare and the wind is unrelenting, a framework of tusks and ribs lashed into arches forms a durable skeleton. Draped with hides and insulated with grass and fur, these domes resist blizzards with surprising resilience. Think of them as emergency pavilions scaled up, load-bearing elements distributed across curved ribs, joints reinforced with rawhide ties and pitch seals. The repeated use of these assemblages, broken and rebuilt, reconditioned and reseamed, speaks to a cultural mastery of materials and an ability to repurpose whole bodies into infrastructure. Small game tactics are the other side of the ledger. Not every day allows a mammoth drive, and when big game is scarce, precision hunting keeps the ledger balanced. Microliths, tiny backed blades and composite barbs on spears make hunting hares, birds, or fish efficient. Netting inferred from cordage impressions suggests mass capture strategies for smaller prey. Evidence of specialized bird butchery bones shows surgical precision, not brute force, and demonstrates a flexible economy. Shift the targeting and conserve big game ammunition for when it matters most. Transport tech closes the loop. Large groups moved kills in stages. Primary butchery at the kill site sorted the bulk into transportable loads. Sinew lashings, sled-like frames, and possibly early travoy made hauling more efficient, especially on snow-packed ground. Permafrost and cold actually help as refrigerated storage when used intentionally. Meat cached in shallow pits becomes a seasonal storehouse. But perishables still require processing, and smokehouses built near camps fast-track preservation. Hunting also drives social mechanisms. Big hunts create social glue, feasts that redistribute calories, ceremonies that mark success, and exchange networks where surplus from a mammoth hunt becomes capital for alliances. These events produce obligations and reputations. A leader who organizes a successful drive accrues social credit. A failed endeavor creates sanctions or necessitates apology gifts. The record of bead-rich burials suggests that status and contribution were tracked and materially rewarded. Finally, risk management is baked into every decision. The margin between brave and reckless is visible in healed fractures and perimortem injuries found in the bones of Ice Age people. Some groups clearly pushed the envelope. Others optimized for minimal loss. The ones that optimized left more descendants. Technologies like the atlatl, pit traps, composite hafting, and architecture are convergent evidence for a coherent strategy. Engineer the environment and the tools to bend probability in your favor. Before you move on to the simple-seeming but transformative act of preparing what you've killed into what your body can use, remember this: a mammoth hunt is civilization condensed into a day, a combination of engineering, material science, choreography, and social coordination. It converts landscape intelligence into calories and shelter. It's where anthropology and applied physics meet over a smoking slab of rib. If the hunt is the headline, the kitchen is the margin where survival profits or bleeds. Picture a circle of coals breathing quietly while the wind claws at the shelter skins. A hide bag, stitched tight with sinew, seams rubbed with fat, bulges with water, A hunter's hand drops in a stone plucked from the fire. It hisses, rolls, and lifts the liquid to a tremble. Another hot stone follows, then another, until the surface shivers toward a simmer. Roots go in, sliced ribbons of water lily rhizome, cubes of bitter tuber shaved thin, a twist of something green that tasted right the last time. This is soup without a pot, a chemistry set in leather. It looks simple. It is anything but. Every motion conserves fuel, saves fingers from steam, and squeezes calories from plants that would mock a raw stomach. The pantry isn't a shelf. It's a mental map. At Thor, berry patches flash brief invitations. In late summer, nuts wait in the canopy. On the river's lip, reeds mark where starch sleeps under mud. Coastal days turn the tide table into a menu. Mussels pry loose from rock seams. A child learns where the slick stones tilt and how far the water nips a careless ankle when the moon pulls too hard. Seaweed dries in strips on a rack, iodine whispering through the brine. Inland, someone wades to their thighs in water cold enough to bite bone, plunges a digging stick, and lifts out a chain of pale roots that turn sweet after heat. Miserable work becomes breakfast. The rule is simple. Broaden the diet or narrow your chances. Fire turns that rule into an advantage. Roasting cracks the stubbornness of meat. Boiling coaxes starch from roots. Smoke slows the clock. A rack is lashed above a calm line of heat, never the flames. So thin strips of flesh cure slowly in a breath scented with ash. Hours later they bend, not snap. Days later, they are still good. Weeks later they are trade, travel, leverage. Bone grease, rendered slow in a skin pot, pours like liquid winter insurance packed into hide pouches or rubbed thick into dried meat to make it richer and more forgiving. The group's relationship with time changes. Food ceases to be a now or never proposition. It becomes a calendar they can carry. Teeth preserve a ledger more durable than bone tools. In the sticky film calcified around molars, a different script appears. Flecks of mushroom tissue, ghost grains from wild grasses, hints of nuts, even residues from plants with bite and purpose. Someone chewed yarrow when a tooth throbbed. Someone else crushed chamomile when fever shouldered them to the ground. The flavors of a pharmacy surface in that microscopic trash. This isn't chance grazing. It's trial, error, and memory braided into habit. An elder hands a sprig across a hearth and says, "Not in words, but in the rhythm of doing. This eases the hurt." The plant list becomes a family secret everyone already knows. Flavor isn't vanity. It's information. A roasting pine nut sweetens them and masks tannin. A plume of steam from wet leaves warns of bitterness. That could mean toxins or medicine, depending on dose. Smoke says safer, longer. Scorch says waste. Even the way fat beads on a slab near the coals tells you if the animal fed on grass is rich enough to repay the effort. Eyes and nose are instruments. Tongues are calibrated by necessity. In a good season, you can indulge a preference. In a bad one, you learn to like what works. When the snow lays a hand over everything, ingenuity steals back inches. Caches become freezers. Meat sunk in shallow permafrost pits, waits under a lid of rock and hard earth, out of reach of teeth that scavenge. The group marks the place in ways only they will read. A particular cairn shape, a line of stones tilted just so, a note written in the grammar of landscape. Returning is a relief measured in heartbeats. The pit gives up cold steam and the savory ghost of smoke, and suddenly there is dinner in a season that shouldn't permit one. Not all calories walk or grow. Some crawl and skim and dive. On a winter coast, the sea becomes a pantry that never fully shuts. Limpets survive where nothing else dares. A pry and twist adds them to the pot. Seals fatten on fish. A harpoon leashed to a line of braided sinew turns their speed into the hunter's safety line. Fish smoke fast and feed many. Eggs raided from a cliff ledge turn a dangerous climb into a party of full bellies. And the seaweed, chewed raw when a fire won't take, boiled when time allows, quietly supplies minerals that save throats from swelling and minds from fogging. Taste like shore is enough of a sell when the alternative is a body slow to think. Hunger is not solved by meat alone. Fiber chaperones the gut through lean stretches. Starch tops off muscles too tired to argue. Grinding stones polish stories into their faces. The same pressure, the same circular sweep, day after day, turning seeds into meal that cooks in hot water to something that stops the shivers. The first flatbreads aren't bakery art. They are engineering projects. Make a dough that holds together. Make a surface that doesn't scorch, rotate, flip, stack. Feed a team too cold to be patient. How a child learns to keep fingers near warmth, but away from flame, to judge doneness by scent and sound, the faint crackle of moisture turning to steam inside. Preservation is the real magic trick. A family's fortunes hinge less on what they kill today than on what they can still eat a month from now. So smoking racks are rebuilt and tended with the same tenderness they give to spears. The right wood matters, less resin, steadier smoke. The right spacing matters, air must move, not gust. The right watchfulness matters most. A moment's inattention cascades into flame and waste. Someone always minds the line between enough and too much. That someone is often the one who also remembers which patch of berries was late last year, or where the walnut shells pile after ravens raid a tree. Knowledge accretes in the people as much as in the tools. Herbs step forward when bodies protest. A smear of fat mixed with ochre and crushed leaves rubs into a sore shoulder, warming it while pigment seals a nick in skin and a seam in a boot. A rinse of hot water over bitter bark makes a mouthful that quiets a stomach long enough to work. Someone steeped a broken twig and waited. If the world didn't spin and the ache dulled, they kept the recipe. If not, they spit it back into the fire and learned a boundary. There is risk here, but there is also a ladder built one rung at a time, from pain to curiosity to caution to habit. A surprise lives at the edge of the rack where meat dries. A skin bag slumps by the fire, filled with mashed berries and a little honey, set aside just for a day. A day becomes 3. A cautious sip becomes a grin. Not every camp drinks on purpose, and not every bag bubbles into cheer. But the possibility exists, sweetness turned lively by wild yeast in the air. Whether it warms a cold night or binds a small feast, the lesson is the same. Time can change food for the better if you watch it and don't let it bite you back. All this doing builds a culture of checking. The hand that turns a strip of meat feels for tack, bend, and perfume. The hand that pokes at pitch watches how it strings and snaps. The voice that says enough at the rack is the same voice that says move when the weather sours 2 hours early. Kitchen and camp aren't separate domains. They are two sides of the same prudence. A full cache reduces panic, and reduced panic keeps mistakes from multiplying. A group that eats regularly fights less, thinks clearer, and dares the right amount at the cliff. The kitchen's final miracle is social. Food doesn't just fuel hunters. It buys peace. A pot that feeds everyone quiets the ego that wants to count spears and tally credit. Sharing isn't kindness. It's strategy that smooths sharp edges between families and makes space for the weekday to be carried by yesterday's strength. The person who smoked through the night holds as much of the group's future in their hands as the one who stood at the ravine with a dart ready. Around the coals everyone knows it, and when the light fades and the rack whispers with cooling wood, someone lays out tomorrow's work, stones to heat, skins to mend, cordage to braid. A child chews a strip of dried meat down to silence and sleeps. A hand tests the simmer one last time and smiles. The hunt earns applause, but the kitchen earns odds. It stretches triumphs, cushions failures, and turns weather into an opponent you can outplan. In the morning, the group will step into a world that wants to lower their numbers. Tonight, the hide bag hums. The smoke writes slow arithmetic into the air and the ledger of survival tilts their way. When the hunt and the kitchen keep people alive, it's the shelter that keeps the cold from undoing all of it. Picture a ring of mammoth bones, tusks arching like white ribs against a sky that can shear flesh with wind alone. Skins stretch across the frame, stitched with sinew, sealed with pitch, weighted at the base with stone. Grass, moss, and snow pack the gaps until the structure breathes slow, like a lung insulated against the blizzard's teeth. This isn't an improvised tent, it's architecture. Curved geometry distributes load, lashings allow flex, and every joint remembers storms past. Step inside and the air shifts from lethal to livable. Hearth smoke feathers upward toward a vent engineered on purpose, not accident. Walls glow orange, shadows dance. A family exhales. Not every shelter is a bone palace. Some are dugouts, scooped into loess or riverbanks, where earth walls insulate and fire multiplies. Some are portable, hide-covered frames collapsible into sled loads when herds move. Portability is as valuable as permanence. The camp is a system tuned to terrain, season, and resources. What matters isn't the form, it's the logic. Hide and bone become timber where trees are scarce. Snow itself becomes brick in domes that rebuke the storm. Each choice is a calculation. Effort in, protection out. Clothing works as mobile shelter. Fur isn't draped. It's cut and shaped with needles fine enough to rival Bronze Age craft. Multiple layers trap air, wick moisture, and flex with movement. Hooded parkas, tailored boots lined with fur, mitts stitched with doubled seams. These are heat retention systems designed with the same care as a house. Jewelry of bone, shell, and bead isn't just ornament. It's stitching weight that stabilizes hems, toggles that lock closures, signals of identity worn into the very mechanics of warmth. Windward, a wall of tusks doubles as barricade. Leeward, racks dry food out of predator scent. Storage pits cluster at the edge of camp, lined with hide, capped with stone. Children sleep closest to the hearth, elders against the most insulated walls. Campsites aren't random, they're rehearsed. You can almost see the blueprint traced in the snow before the first stake is driven. Shelter is not what you throw up when the cold comes. It's what you bring into being so the cold is never allowed inside, and within these spaces, something extra happens. Beads are strung, ochre paints spiral patterns on skin and bone, flutes breathe sound into dark hours. Shelter isn't only insulation against cold, it's insulation against despair. It's where meaning is stitched alongside seams, where warmth is measured in both degrees and in the cadence of stories. Here the Ice Age reveals its core paradox. In the most hostile climates, humans built not just safety but culture. How sound, symbol, and memory became as vital to survival as spears and fire. Start with the needle, because everything hangs on that sliver of bone. It's carved thin, polished, slick, and drilled with an eye so tiny you have to wet sinew to thread it. In a world where wind can peel warmth off your skin faster than hunger can, this needle is a survival engine. Hides aren't just draped, they're tailored. Pieces cut on the curve, fur oriented for wind, seams doubled where strain will try to rip them open. A jacket isn't a pelt, it's a heat trap with airflow and sweat in mind. Hides arrive from the hunt as problems to be solved. First, scraping, a beam, a fleshing tool, and hours of pulling fat and membrane away until the skin stops shining and starts listening. Then chemistry without bottles, fat rubbed into fibers to make them supple, smoke from a mild, steady fire, drifting through a tented hide to waterproof it, and lay down phenols that tell microbes to keep their distance. Sometimes it's brain tan. Every animal has just enough brain to tan its own hide, the old joke goes, and the emulsion works into the network until the sheet flexes like cloth instead of creaking like bark. Rinse, stretch, pull until your hands burn, and suddenly the cold has less to grip. Cutting is math. Patterns are traced by memory onto the hide, so that the thickest areas guard shoulders and elbows, where wear will try to win, and thinner panels go where flex matters more than armor. Fur direction becomes policy. Face it down. Along the sleeves, so melting snow runs off the cuffs, not into them. Flip fur inward on hoods for quiet warmth, and outward on capes where shedding spindrift matters more than comfort. Underarm gussets, let arms throw a spear without tearing stitches. Hem tabs accept toggles that can be worked with mitts on. Every line anticipates a complaint from weather and answers before it's spoken. Thread is muscle, literally. Sinew split from tendon into fine fibers, swells when damp and shrinks as it dries, locking a seam tighter than it was when you tied it. Stitch types are not decoration, they're function. Whip stitches for edges that will be bound later. Running stitches where a seam will be doubled and pressed flat. Overcast stitches to prevent fray on raw edges. A quiver of awls pierces clean holes, so bone needles don't crack under stress, and the needle tip is polished, not sharpened, so it parts fibers without cutting them. Cut fibers fail, parted fibers hold. Boots are a thesis in their own right. Start with a sole of thick hide, roughened where it meets the ground, and treated with fat so it shrugs off slush. Uppers of softer leather stitched to the sole with a seam. That stands proud on the outside. Less rub inside, more longevity out. Into the boot goes a twist of dried grass or a woven liner of plant fiber, insulation that wicks sweat away from skin and can be tossed and replaced when it collapses or stinks. Laces are braided sinew or twisted rawhide that dries stiff, so toggles are smarter. Antler pegs you can manipulate blind by feel in a whiteout. Snowshoe lash points are built in. Holes reinforced with extra stitching where a frame can tie on when the crust won't carry a boot alone. Mitts and hoods are systems, not afterthoughts. Mitts get a shell and a liner, so the inner stays dry. Under the outer's snowy chores, a mouth-warmed breath across a seam tells you if it leaks. Hoods build a fur ruff around the face that trips wind and stops ice from kissing eyelids. A single stitch failure here is frostnip by morning, so the work is checked, then checked again. You don't trust a seam until you pull it like you're trying to break it. Waterproofing isn't a myth, it's maintenance. Fat rubbed into seams after smoke steps down the wicking. Ochre mixed with grease pushes water off at critical points, and marks gear so it comes back to the right body after a communal dry-out. When rain and thaw push too hard, a cape of rawhide worn hair out sheds like a roof tile. When it freezes, you flex the cape to crack the glaze of ice before it stiffens. Everyone has a technique, and the best ones are imitated by the rest before pride can get in the way. Decoration is not wasted effort, it's information you can read at a glance. Bead bands aren't just pretty, they add mass that makes an edge hang straight and signals which family made which garment. A line of fox teeth on a belt is hardware. Each tooth is a loop anchor for tool cords and a fastener under gloves. An eagle talon pendant says something bolder. I did this, or my people did, and we remember. The time it takes to carve ivory beads, hours per bead, thousands for a full set, translates directly into social capital. You can count the labor. In a necklace the way you can count ribs in a mammoth rack. It tells you what this group can marshal when it needs to. Lice are inevitable, strategy follows. Smoke sessions in a closed shelter with low steady heat persuade insects to abandon ship. Fine combs whittled from bone-lift knits. Bedding goes outside to freeze and is beaten clean on frames. A smear of aromatic herbs in collar seams, strong scents that also happen to annoy bugs, does a quiet job. No one romanticizes this. It's a task like scraping a hide or mending a snowshoe. Boring, necessary, and the difference between sleep and scratching. Repair is constant, so repair kits are standard issue. Little rolls hold spare needles, slivers of pitch for emergency sealing, a twist of sinew, a shard of flint for trimming a frayed edge. The habit is to patch now, not later. A nick becomes a tear, becomes a night you remember for the wrong reason. Hems are reinforced where snowshoes and brushes snag. Cuffs get sacrificial bindings designed to wear out and be replaced. On the move, every rest stop is a chance to poke at seams with a thumbnail and feel for failure before it announces itself in wind. Children don't graduate into clothes, they graduate into making them. The first job is scraping, because scraping builds the hands that can handle needles later. The second is twisting sinew, because thread teaches patience. The third is mending, a seam on something that can be sacrificed if the stitch goes wrong. Apprenticeship is measured in winters, not days. By the time someone wears a parka they made, they've already trusted their life to garments built by others and learned exactly what a lazy stitch costs. Style spreads across valleys the way tool designs do. A particular bead pattern shows up 100 kilometers away. A hood shape bred for crosswinds appears in a camp that faces different storms but likes the performance. Trade isn't only flint and shells, it's cut patterns and sewing tricks, cached in memory and passed across fires as surely as a blade changes hands. A new seam that doesn't leak, a boot that doesn't blister, a mitten that doesn't freeze at the tip. These are technologies, and they diffuse along with stories. Some garments are specialized tools. A hunter's overlayer is trimmed short, in front so legs clear it when sprinting, longer behind to cover kidneys from wind. A seamster's lap apron of rawhide stands between sharp flakes and thighs. A child's hood has a small bone roll sewn into the rim so a parent can grab it and steer in a blizzard without losing grip. A nursing cloak hooks and unhooks with a single toggle so cold air doesn't pour in while hands are busy. Everything is biased toward function first, but function leaves plenty of room for pride. Every camp has a test before departure. Someone kneels by the hearth and steams seams, literally hovers each seam over a gentle plume, watching for capillary seep, feeling with the backs of fingers for a chill wetness. Boots get flexed heel to toe until the fibers remember their job. Hoods get cinched and released to check cords. A last rub of fat on the high wear spots is the difference between repairs at dusk and sleep at dusk. When the door flap opens and wind speaks, the garments answer. They either say yes or they say too late. And here's the quiet headline. Clothing turns weather from fate into terrain. A well-cut parka plus practiced layering means the group can choose routes others can't. Higher ridges where wind scours snow into hard crust perfect for fast travel. River ice that would terrify a body, wrapped only in hope and a blanket. Clothing expands the map. It also expands time. With less heat lost, the day is longer. With less damp, the night is shorter. With fewer stops to warm hands that never froze, the distance stretches under steady feet. When the camp moves, garments go first. On bodies, yes, but also in how shelters are conceived and work is divided. Seamsters sit near the hearth at night, spearing a darkness softened by lamplight, while hunters sharpen stone for tomorrow's throws. Beadworkers count in a music of clicks and whispers. Children doze with a bootliner clenched in a hand that will learn to twist grass into insulation by spring. It's all one machine. The hide on your back, the food in your belly, the fire at your feet. The needle is just the smallest gear that turns the largest wheel. And tomorrow, when the weather tries again, you'll step into it wearing choices, not chances. Start in the dark, where breath turns to fog and lamplight shivers on stone. Someone grinds ochre with a rhythm that sounds like footsteps far away, adds a smear of fat, and turns rock powder into paint that clings to fingers and promises permanence. The cave swallows sound, then throws it back a heartbeat later. Even silence here has an echo. A hand presses to the wall, another mouth blows pigment through a hollow bird bone, and a negative hand blooms, one life-sized signature in a gallery that doesn't care about names. That palm says we were here. We mattered. Remember us. The walls are not blank. They are a field whose contours guide the brush. A bulge suggests a mammoth shoulder. A crack becomes the line of a bison's spine. A shallow trough catches charcoal and turns into a shadow that makes an aurochs look like it's stepping into the torchlight. This is not doodling. It's controlled illusion. The painter has watched animals at distance and at arm's length, watched flank muscles slide like ropes under fur, watched lungs pump in a chest the size of a boat. With a shard of charcoal or a stick dipped in ochre paste, they pull motion from stone. Heads lowered to charge, legs mid-stride, a twist at the hip that anyone who's ever run can feel in their own bones. 2 extra horns, a second head faint beneath the first. Animation as overdraw, motion blur before the word existed. Why paint where light barely reaches? Because the dark holds attention like a fist. Because the air is still enough to keep a flame steady. Because voices soften, and the group can listen without interruption. Deep chambers make acoustics that bend sound into something round and communal. When a drum beat, 2 stones clapped, a hollow log struck, rolls along a corridor and returns as if answered by something older than people, you understand why stories dress themselves in echoes. The cave edits you. It strips the ordinary and leaves what matters. Here meaning accumulates, a cluster of handprints at shoulder height, some small as a child's, some as big as a hunter's palm, red like attendance. A spray of dots near a stag's belly could be nothing, or a way to count seasons, or a signal to those who will return when the herd cycles again. Abstract lines crisscross the body of a horse. Maybe it's decoration. Maybe it's the memory of a net's pattern. Maybe it's the path the animal ran on a ridge last spring, mapped and fixed. Every mark invites a guess, and every guess is a way to rehearse knowledge. Sculpture lives beside painting, as portable as a pocket charm and as heavy as an idea. A figurine carved from ivory or soft stone fits into a fist. Some show human shapes with bellies and hips claimed by gravity, a celebration of softness in a harsh world. Others blur human and animal. A head with a muzzle, shoulders that suggest fur under cloth, a spine that can't decide between upright and on all fours. These are not photographs. They are statements. They say bodies are stories, boundaries are negotiable, and power can borrow a shape for an evening if a song invites it. And there are songs. Bone flutes carved from vulture wings or the long bones of deer take on holes placed not by accident, but by habit, spacings that give intervals that please and steady a breath. A melody sips the air and returns slower. It can soothe a child to sleep or carry a group across the last hard half hour of a march when the sky turns the color of iron and feet want to quit. Percussion is cheaper. 2 stones struck, a rack of ribs tapped, a drumhead stretched from hide and laced to a hoop that once framed a drying net. Rhythm knits movement. It times the throw in a hunt as surely as it keeps hands stitching in sync through the long dark. Ritual is the choreography of memory and need. Consider a hunt that took nerve and luck. The group returns with meat, fat and bone that will warm the hearth and build the next shelter. That night the story is told, not because anyone forgot, but because telling compresses chaos into something you can pass to the child who didn't go. Where did the wind come from? Who held back and who stepped in? Which ridge channeled the herd? The storyteller's hand rises when the cliff edge appears again in the mind, lowering to mark the moment when gravity joined the team. Laughter spikes at the part where someone slid and cursed. Silence tightens when a horn missed and a body came too close to hooves. The story is a map you can fold and put in your head. Tomorrow someone else will unfold it correctly and perhaps live because of that. Ritual also takes care of endings. Death is not a rumor here. Tools cut meat from bone with the same motions that carve a spear point, but when the body is human, the gestures change. Ochre dust on skin turns cold into color. Hands place beads, a favorite tool, a token that whispers of a hunt or a meal or a joke that once held a whole evening together. Graves are shallow or deep depending on ground, but they are tended with a thoroughness that says, the living need as much care as the dead. The act of arranging, of choosing this pendant over that, of smoothing the hair one last time heals. In the morning the group can walk, and yet the world is not only solemn. Play lives here too. A tune sputters into laughter. When a note ducks and hides, a child copies the handprint of a parent and smears it off on purpose. Someone paints a line that looks suspiciously like the loping gait of a neighbor they are teasing. A necklace becomes a counting game. How many beads did your aunt grind before the snows? More than that? Prove it. Joy has calories. It repays the cost of the day by persuading bodies to rest and minds to quiet. Decoration folds into function until you can't separate them. A painted pattern on a spear's shaft is a grip you can recognize blind. The marks on a sewing needle's handle tell which seamster's hand it fits. The little notches on a counting stick correspond to a moon cycle, or the years since a certain valley burned and returned greener. A lamp cut from a stone bowl and filled with fat throws a flame that gutters less when the wick is braided just so. Someone taught someone else to twist the fibers in opposite directions before laying them together, and that stubborn memory is now a halo on a cave wall where a painter can see without choking. Exchange carries art farther than feet alone could. A shell from far-off water settles at a throat hundreds of kilometers inland and rattles when its wearer dances. And the sound itself is a map of where one person's world overlaps another's. A motif appears at distant camps, a spiral with 3 tails, a ladder of dots, and no one claims invention, only recognition. Yours too? Says a raised eyebrow over a fire. A grin answers. The pattern is now a password and a truce drawn in pigment. The suspicion that some marks are more than pretty refuses to die. A row of dots near a horn's base repeats across caverns. A grid appears where hunters meet rivers. Maybe these are calendars. Maybe they are promises. When the dots are this many, meet us at the flat stones. Maybe they are instructions. If you follow this line, you'll find the notch that looks east. The beauty of not knowing is that the mind keeps returning like a hand to a familiar tool, testing for balance, finding reassurance in the wait. If all of this sounds like spare time luxury, look again. Symbol isn't frosting on survival. It's a survival tool. A song keeps marching feet in phase so the group covers more ground before dusk. A story encodes a cliff's treachery and keeps a child away from an edge even when no one is watching. A painted herd rehearses where a real herd will likely pass and fixes that knowledge after elders who learned it are gone. A burial sweetens grief into continuity so the living don't split under the load. Art is a file format. Ritual is the backup. Music is the sync. At the end of a long night, the painter's hands are stained. The flautist's breath is even again. The storyteller's voice is sanded down to a whisper. The cave swallows the last lamp and gives the group back to starlight so clean it almost hums. Outside, the wind writes its own lines across snow. Inside, on stone, a bison still runs, a hand still glows, and a ring of dots still waits to be counted by someone not yet born. Tomorrow will ask for skill and effort and nerve. Tonight builds the part of the group that says, together, we can. Start with the footprint of a camp. Not one fire, but several. Not one shelter, but a cluster. Not a chaos of debris, but zones that make sense. Here's the sewing hearth, quiet and hot. There's the butchery patch, swept of splinters so no one slices a foot at night. A child's play circle scuffed into earth, where small tools can drop without disappearing. This layout isn't accidental. It's the visible face of rules. In groups of 20 to 50, the sweet spot that keeps you mobile enough to follow herds and numerous enough to face weather and predators. Everybody knows where everything goes because confusion wastes heat and time. The camp is a diagram of cooperation. Morning has a schedule, even if no one can read a clock. Water crew first, because ice takes longer than thirst will wait. Fuel crew next, raking windfalls or gathering dung where wood has given up. Hunters sort darts and replace barbs. Foragers check cords and bags. Elders inventory yesterday's caches with a glance sharp enough to feel like a touch. Babies are slung to chests under warmed layers, twitching with dream hunts. Adolescents hover at the edge of adult tasks, aching to be waved in. Leadership isn't a crown. It's who people follow without arguing when clouds stack or a herd shifts. If a call saves calories or lives often enough, the caller becomes the voice you obey when the sky turns bad. Food is the nearest thing to law. The kill returns to camp and the cut sequence begins, visible entitlement shifting to deliberate sharing. If you held a flank that made the drive work, people saw. If you jumped at the wrong time and spooked a line, people saw that too. But when the marrow is tapped and the fats are rendered, bowls pass broadly. Not because anyone has soft hearts, but because individuals hoarding today make the group brittle tomorrow, and brittleness breaks under weather and chance. You can taste ethics in the stew. A group with the habit of sharing carries more summers into its winters. Caring is not charity, it's strategy. A man limps back from a fall at a ravine lip. Someone else takes his pack without speech. A woman's hands crack under brine. A cousin smears a paste of fat and ochre on the worst splits and assigns her to sewing for 3 days, while a sister hunts in her place. Healed fractures say what words don't need to. People were carried and fed when they couldn't do those things alone. The return on that investment is knowledge retained. The one with the bad leg tells stories that keep teenagers from repeating the exact mistake that bent it. The one with the careful hands shows a new seam that laughs at rain. To keep elders is to keep libraries. Conflict is inevitable. Procedure keeps it from turning camps into splinters. Grievances are aired at night when bellies are warm and torches soften faces. A spear borrowed and not returned becomes a promise backed by something visible. A bead owed. A morning of fuel gathering traded. A task picked up without being asked. If blood rises, the group has memory for that too. Someone describes the last time anger spread like fire and what it cost. The memory embarrasses just enough to cool it. Fights still happen. Healed skulls confirm that. But the habit is to bind wounds and keep moving, because the morning won't wait for pride. Risk is budgeted across bodies. Parents of small children don't anchor cliff drives unless the group is desperate. The strongest legs break trail in waist-deep snow, while others stamp it wider behind them. Watch rotates. The best ears do the dawn shift when predators test the edge of camp, and the light sleepers take midnight. A tiny bell of shell on a cord strung across an entry whispers, if someone steps where they shouldn't. Dogs, half-wild companions that share meat and return alarms, loaf as if lazy, then erupt at the scratch of an unfamiliar paw. You can't buy such sentries. You raise them by habit and leftovers. Mating isn't a free-for-all. The gene pool needs fresh water, so gatherings matter. A valley becomes a fairground for 3 nights when herds stall. Fires stipple the slope like a spilled constellation. Songs repeat across camps. Familiar, reassuring, altered slightly in a way that says, hello, we are not you, but we know your words. Beads traded don't just cross necks. They cross boundaries. Someone's glance meets someone else's across a steam of stew, and a dance pulse marked by sticks on log. Elders run a kind of mental ledger. Who shares which ancestors, who is safe to pair. Couples form with jokes as grease and solemnity as sealant. The next spring's genealogies are simpler than they might have been without such choreography. Status shows, but it doesn't always shout. A necklace heavy with ivory says weeks at the grindstone and credit to spend. A spear shaft etched with repeated motifs says the owner returns more often than not, or at least wants you to think so. Yet the camp checks vanity. A decorated parka won't keep you warm if its seams rot, and a loud braggart looks smaller when a quiet seamster fixes a tear that would have ended a hunt. Children watch both and decide who they want to be, without anyone telling them outright. teaching is opportunistic. A child's hand on a flake's sharp edge becomes a lesson about pressure and angle before blood spills. A misthrown dart becomes a lecture about wind seen in grass. Moon marks cut into a stick become a way to remember when geese returned last year and when water lilies lifted. Someone sketches a ridge and a cut bank in ash with a stick and says, "Here, then here." Tomorrow a teenager follows that map and arrives where fish run. The map is erased by a foot in passing. The knowledge isn't. Justice exists in the negative, in exclusions no one wants. A thief who repeats the habit finds bowls thinner at their spot. A liar watched a day too long is sent on an errand that takes them out of the circle until they feel the wind's voice alone and remember why the circle exists. Return is common. Exile is rare and feared. Even the worst offender may be called back for a winter if the group takes losses. Survival abrades absolutes. Spiritual weight helps hold the rope taut. A burial is not only grief, it's a meeting about continuity. Beads poured into a grave are a debt to the dead and an asset for the living, a promise to fill that loss by pulling together. A handprint on a cave wall is a vote cast for we. When disputes tangle, the group sometimes walks to that wall at dusk and places fresh hands under the old ones. It's theater, yes, but it works. Hands cool faster on stone than around throats. Borders exist without fences. A valley belongs to a group because they know it better. But knowledge can be rented. A visiting band brings obsidian knives. A resident band loans a guide to a waterhole that is mean to strangers. A wrong taken on one side of a ridge can be paid for on the other, with meat from a good day. The currency is reputation. The ledger is memory. News runs on feet and rumor. Signals, the spiral cut into a willow, a pile of stones laid like a line of teeth say, "We passed. We took little. Follow if you must." And threading through this tapestry is the quiet truth that our kind was not alone. Where ranges overlapped, people like us met people enough like us to understand, and different enough to become story. Sometimes they traded tricks, glue recipes, hunt timings. Sometimes they competed and bled. Sometimes they paired and had children who folded traits from both sides into one body. The proof lives in faces you might recognize on a city street today if you could see below skin and into code. Little echoes, tiny toggles that tuned immune systems or tipped tempers. A campfire can hold more than one lineage without burning down. By night's end, the noise settles into the low music of small work. Someone mends a boot. Someone knots a new toggle. Someone braids a child's hair so it won't snarl in wind. The guard coughs twice, the agreed signal that all is quiet. Embers click and sigh. The rules of this world are not written, but they are lived so hard they might as well be carved into bone. In the morning the herd could move. The ice could crack, a storm could bully the horizon. The group will rise into it as a single tool made of many hands, practiced, argued over, resilient. Society isn't a later invention. It's right here, breathing in unison under stitched hide. Start with a blade that doesn't belong. It turns up in a camp far from any outcrop that could have birthed it. Obsidian, glossy as night water, flint the color of distant hills. You can feel the distance when you thumb the edge. That edge is a receipt from a road without ruts, a path braided from handshakes, favors, and stories. Trade looks invisible until an object points like a compass needle to the place it started. Then you see the routes that never leave tracks, along river spines, over saddles where wind scours snow to hard crust, through valleys where herds pause and people do too. A shell rattles on a necklace 1,000 kilometers from surf. A red stone streaks a spear shaft in a valley that never knew such color, until a traveler's pouch spilled it across the firelight. These routes aren't marked with signs. They're remembered in bodies and marks that only the right eyes read. A spiral cut into willow bark says, "We passed peacefully." 3 stacked stones on a ridge whisper, "Water below, one day's walk used gently." Patterns in beadwork act like passwords, motifs that say we are cousins you've not met, or strangers you should treat as such. Ideas ride alongside objects. A seam that doesn't leak turns up in a new camp the year after a gathering by the river. A particular atlatl hook shape, carved with a flourish as if vanity snuck in under utility, appears in hands that never shared a hunt with the maker. Culture is the cargo that doesn't need a pack frame. Alliances form where routes cross. When migration squeezes herds through a narrow valley, fires pepper the slope, and the night blinks like a necklace. People meet with their bravest faces on, and their hands open where knives could be. A pot gets set between groups and stew becomes a treaty. If we eat together, we will not waste the talk. Gifts trade in circles, meat traded for stone. A child's toy carved from mammoth bone for tips on where rivers run shallow enough to ford. The old bargain is simple. When your land is the larder, hospitality is insurance. Feed a traveler today, and word of your generosity will walk ahead of you next winter, when you might be the one asking for a coal and a corner by the fire. Not all crossings end in trade. Sometimes a route carries trouble like a river carries ice. A quarrel over a good cave, a jealousy over a hunt that grazed the edge of someone else's claim, a hot-headed insult that finds an echo. There are scars to prove it, healed fractures that left a limp, ribs that knitted crooked, skulls with stories hammered into them. Yet even after blood patterns pull people back together. The meat must move, the stones must move, knowledge most of all must move. The cost of a feud multiplied across a winter is death. So the habit after anger is to patch the breach with something visible, a loaned tool, a guided day's walk, a public apology wrapped in humor so it can be swallowed without choking. Animals travel the same corridors, and people learn to read those itineraries as if the herds wrote them in big letters. Narrow shelves on a cliff face become notes. Horses ran here last year when the flies came heavy. Bison favored the shaded side when the wind swung from the east. A group can turn such footnotes into a plan. Fire used lightly in late summer. To clear brush grows tender shoots by spring. The herd follows sweetness, and the hunters follow them. Grasslands burn with or without permission. Guided burns are the difference between a trap set for you and a table laid for later. The line between living with a landscape and living off it is thin. The groups that lasted longest learned to keep a toe on the right side. Dogs nose into this network early as roomers, and then as partners. A wolf-like shape circles camp, gauging distances and intentions. Meat tossed just short becomes overtures. One day the animal sleeps near the edge of the firelight, one ear up even while breathing deep. Puppies follow as naturally as river follows slope. They haul small loads when you tell them to, but only after listening becomes a habit for both sides. They warn when the wrong footsteps scrape at the dark. They find blood trails in scrub that looks the same in every direction, to eyes alone. You can't carve a dog from stone or braid it from sinew. You make one by paying attention, and in return it stretches the map you can walk safely. Climate writes its own terms into every treaty. Winters lengthen, shorten, break, then bite again in hammer swings called by later people Dansgaard Ushka, but known then as the year the lake froze late and the spring that never came. Ice lays a palm on the sea and the shore moves. A land bridge lifts its back like a whale, and people walk where their parents sailed. Then the sea breathes in and old paths drown. Groups survive by refusing to marry a single route. They keep backup maps in their heads. If the past drifts shut, skirt the south face. If the river snarls and roars brown, leave the valley and find the high springs. Camps learn to pivot not because they love change, but because change keeps loving them. Extinction comes like a slow theft, and a burst of violence at once. Megafauna that anchored menus and myths thin in some regions, as the world warms and people sharpen their methods. Arguments about blame are as old as sorrow. To the ones living it, the details matter less than the outcome. A day arrives when the valley that was a certainty is only wind and old tracks. Some groups break. Others widen the diet, move their lines farther, trade more aggressively for what's missing. The ones who made preservation into religion, smoking, drying, caching with almost legalistic discipline, hold on longer. The ones with more songs than skills don't. Even in loss, knowledge accrues. People learn to read ice by sound. A river's black gloss sings lower when it will take your weight, higher when it will punish your greed. A lake's surface pops like a thrown stone when the skin is fresh and fragile. They learn the politics of predators, how far a cat will shadow before deciding you're worth the try. How a bear learns your rhythms and must be surprised into remembering it should be shy. They map where thunder throws trees down, so that in a year there will be grubs to dig for when everything else fails. They know where wind flutes snow into shapes that lie about the ground beneath, and where the sound changes because a hollow waits under what looks like solid drift. Information itself becomes a thing you can pack. Notched bones tick off moons. Strings of beads carry messages on a private loom. 3 dark, 2 light. 3 dark to say we wait at the third bend, or the fish are early. A tune spread across valleys becomes a signal heard before faces are seen. A dancer's step pattern, left stamp turn, repeats in a camp far away and means we are not enemies. Even the way a fire is built, the triangle of stones, the way the windbreak is stacked, tells a passerby whether to announce themselves loud or slip away without being noticed. If you think all this motion and message is luxury, lay a hand on the ledger kept in bones. A healed wrist because a neighbor knew where to find willow bark for a tea that eased pain. A child alive because a stranger told a story about thin ice and the way it puckers around dead weeds. A camp that didn't starve because a trade brought flint when a quarry had been buried by a slide. Networks turn disaster into inconvenience. Without them, inconvenience becomes disaster. The legacy of these networks outlives the ice. The atlatls' logic of leverage spreads across peoples who never saw a glacier's face. Sewing becomes civilization's default fix for anything that needs to be two shapes at once. Fire as process turns kilns into pottery and pitch into mastics that glue ships together. Stories that once kept children from cliffs become myths that keep cities from eating themselves. Dogs walk into houses made of brick and act as if they invented the couch. In truth, they helped invent us. At the far edge of this world, the ice thins. The sea drinks back its bridges and forests put their shoulders into the grasslands that once stretched to the horizon. Camps shift toward rivers that fatten with fish, toward edges where nuts and fruit arrive in waves. People plant themselves longer and watch the land plant itself back. The roots don't vanish. They tangle tighter. What used to take seasons takes a month. What used to be rumor becomes expectation. If we go, there will be someone there and we will speak a few of the same words. Stand at a pass at dusk and listen. Wind combs grass that wasn't here a generation ago. Far below, a fire winks awake, then another. A dog barks twice and a second bark answers. Somewhere close, a shell on a thong knocks against a breastbone as its wearer climbs, and the sound is a tiny ocean from 100 lifetimes away. A spear point in a pouch taps an obsidian cousin it met last year at a feast, where two bands traded jokes and futures. The network hums, silent to anyone who doesn't know how to hear it, loud to those who do. When morning comes, feet will crease the frost and write today's news onto a trail that won't remember it by noon. But the minds that walk will. They are the archive, the warehouse, the ledger, the map. They carry roots and rules, debts and dances, tricks for flame and cures pulled from a green seam on a north-facing rock. The ice thought it set the terms. The networks decided otherwise. In a place that punishes the solitary, connection is the only shelter that throws no shadow and costs nothing to pack.